From game day to signing day, breaking down every snap and all the news on Alabama's top football recruits. It's time for Crimson and Blue Chips with your host, John Garcia Jr.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into a fresh week of Crimson and Blue Chips. I'm your host, John Garcia Jr., and I want to congratulate you, yes you, because we finally made it. It is officially game week. College football has begun. Alabama, Louisville, a mere few days away in Orlando, Camping World Stadium. The Camping World Kickoff is what they're calling it. No more fluff, no more camp. It is game week. Tide and the title defense kicking off in a matter of days. So we're going to begin to shift gears towards that right here on the podcast. We are going to bring in a writer who we've known for a very long time, but we hadn't featured him on the show just yet, Michael McCammon. He's a contributor for Cardinal Authority, knows all too well everything there is to know about the Louisville Cardinals. So we need to start introducing that on the podcast. We have to get familiar. I spent a good part of Sunday doing some research, watching a little bit of video on the Cardinals to begin to form my own opinion in this post-Lamar Jackson era. And I think he can help us really set a foundation for what we'll be looking at throughout the week as Alabama kicks off the 2018 season. So Michael McCammon going to spend a lot of time with us. We're going to go unit by unit to really dig into the basics with this Louisville team, their identity on offense and defense. And then we'll eventually get into some matchups later in the week. But after Michael, we'll get into Q&A. We'll talk to you guys about the team. And of course, we will touch on recruiting to wrap up this Monday edition of the podcast. Follow along on YouTube, SoundCloud, and of course, 24/7 Sports. And get ready for a big week of podcasts right here on CABC.
Very excited to get this man on our program. I've been working alongside him at Scout and now 24/7 Sports for quite some time. We've worked together and collaborated on a lot of different recruiting projects, but want to bring it to the other side now with Michael McCammon from Cardinal Authority, of course, the Louisville site on the network. Michael, good to be on with you in this format, in this venue. How's the offseason been? We're finally here, game week.
It is, and it's been an off season of a lot of question marks, wanting to figure out what's happening with this football team. Obviously, a lot to replace, leading obviously with Lamar Jackson, which we'll certainly get into. But it's just, John, I'm just excited that we're finally being able to start to talk football. I mean, it's one moment you turn around and it's the start of summer. Next thing you know, here we go, time to play.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, I was. We've been so busy over here just looking at, and I'm sure it's the same thing at Louisville. Bama's got this quarterback situation going down and there's this reality TV show going down and there's injuries and all these storylines and everybody's focus has been kind of split and recruiting is always important. So it's been everywhere. We've been everywhere as a show, but new week, game week, we figured not a better time to get involved with you guys. And let's go right to the quarterback situation because I can't imagine what you guys are dealing with in your coverage based on the questions because we have grown to have a little bit of quarterback fatigue with the questions going on with the Alabama quarterbacks. So how many times have you been asked, how in the world is Louisville going to replace this Heisman Trophy winning first-round draft pick?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's not easy to replace a Heisman winner. And then when it's somebody, as gifted as Lamar Jackson is, and, we just saw it in his last preseason outing with the Ravens, the way he can do with both his arm and his leg. Had a nice outing just the other night. But, yeah, it's difficult. But, at the same time, I think for those of us close to Louisville that cover it on a daily basis like we do at Cardinal Authority and we're trying to find, follow the storylines throughout the summer, it's really been known since heck, when last season started, the Juwan pass was pretty much the heir apparent to Lamar Jackson. So there wasn't really that much of a question or a quarterback competition of who's going to replace Lamar Jackson. It's just how will Louisville replace those yards, and those are legit questions, especially when you've got a brand new quarterback who, when he's had the spotlight on him, he's looked quite well. Had an absolute wonderful spring game. I mean, just lit it up. When he came in to replace Lamar Jackson last year late in games, looked quite well. He's not Lamar Jackson. Not many people are. I mean, Juwan Pass. Alabama fans might remember him. The Crimson Tide actually recruited him pretty heavily a couple of years ago. But he's more of a prototypical Bobby Petrino type quarterback. Likes to drop back in the pocket. We'll look over his options. He's got a great receiving core to play with this year. A much improved running back game, and an offensive line that's really the strength of the team. So he's in a great situation. Tough first game to do it against. Obviously, as Alabama's got a great defense, so it's going to be curious to see how Juwan handles the spotlight. But I think he's got the ability. He's shown the ability. It's just as soon as he gets comfortable with the game, how quickly that Bobby Petrino offense gets going again. Because this isn't the first time Petrino's replaced the first a starting quarterback. And he's always more often than not, I should say, has a team that's amongst the top 20 in total offense. So he knows what he's doing. I don't think he's really worried about not finding the yards. But I think it's going to be an offense that looks a little different, but I think it will move the ball.
Yeah, obviously, Lamar was so ball dominant. It was like you want the football in his hands. You want everything through him. He's like one of these new age NBA point guards. Yeah, he can score, he can pass, he can do everything. So I know obviously in that regard there'll be a big difference. But I think one good thing you brought up there about Bobby Petrino, I think sometimes we forget his reputation and just how well that guy can rack up yards and rack up points. And like you said, with Juwan, he's settled. This isn't year one, year two. He's been on campus forever, it seems like. And like you said, this is a blue chipper coming out of high school, 4-star guy, big, strong kid out of Carver in Columbus, Georgia. What about Petrino's reputation makes him so successful? And is it just putting the quarterbacks in a easy position where you're maximizing his strengths? Is it just a system that you can plug and play everybody into? What makes Bobby successful with that position, and how can Juwan kind of be the next guy?
I think that's kind of you have to separate the Lamar Jackson years versus the rest of the Bobby Petrino Louisville era years. I mean, Lamar Jackson, anybody that saw the highlights, it was one of those. It was a broken play that may end up in a 73-yard touchdown run for Lamar Jackson. But without Lamar Jackson, in a more typical Bobby Petrino type quarterback, a guy that likes to get in the pocket but can run when necessary. I think he gets this persona that he's this pass-happy quarterback coach, which he does develop great quarterbacks. But when you look through his years, he's got a very, very balanced offense. In fact, when you look, I was doing this thing we're going to publish at Cardinal Authority here in a day or two, that his top 4 yards per game offenses that he's had during his tenure. 2 of them are Lamar Jackson years, 2016, 2017, 16, obviously the Heisman Trophy one year. But the other years were 2004, 2005, when he had guys like Michael Bush in the backfield, Colby Smith, who's now an assistant coach that played 4 years with the Kansas City Chiefs, and they were averaging over 250 yards on the ground. So he's got an ability to find, and he's got this saying, feed the studs. So he's got an ability to find the guy who's kind of the hot hand, whether it be a quarterback going through the air to find an open receiver, or a guy that's just pounding the ball up the middle, and so he's been able to do that quite well and keep a balanced offense. So, I think if he's been able to script extremely well, and I think if he scripts well and the team's able to capitalize on that, then it gets Louisville ahead, and then obviously that's a coach's wanted position is to be able to coach from ahead. So he's been able to do that throughout his career, both through the air and on the ground.
Yeah, Mike, it seems like it'll be kind of a more balanced approach. You mentioned some of those older teams. Yeah. I mean, bigger running backs, more pro-style, NFL-type running backs, if you will. He's produced a bunch of skill guys all over the offense. So are you expecting more balance? Again, because was it just that Lamar, you had to kind of tweak things to get him in that decision-making mode more because of how special he was? So do you expect it to be more of at least you try to be more 50-50, 60-40 in the run-pass ratio there?
Yeah, I think Lamar's just so talented. He just kind of had the green light. I'm sure there were many plays that were called run plays to go to the running back that Lamar saw something and ended up in a Lamar run. But typically, he's closer to that 50-50 balance, and he's really been bullish on the running backs. They kind of got banged up last year. The two of their top running backs, Dave Williams and Colin Wilson, both suffering ACL injuries, are both now back 100%. Trey Smith running the ball really well. So if the backs do perform as he and running back coach Colby Smith expect them to, then I do expect a 50-50 balance, even with a receiving core that, is probably tops in the ACC, top 10 in the country. So.
Well, I was going to get to that receiving core. We know the O-line's good, has a good amount of experience returning. The running backs are going to be plentiful. I know there's a deep stable there, but the receiving core, I think, is really the unit that the Lamar Jackson-less Cardinals should scare Bama fans, at least on the forefront when you think of matchups. Louisville's got all this depth and experience returning at wide receiver. Alabama has zero experience returning in the secondary. So in that regard, that should be a worry point for Alabama. And then you look at the roster. I mean, you look at these guys, Jalen Smith, Seth Dawkins, Fitzpatrick, all 6'2 plus, all bigger-bodied wide receivers. How diverse are their skill sets, Mike? And you said the O-line might be the strength of the team. So where does that put the wide receivers in that discussion?
That'd be a good debate. I'd like to get those two groups in the same room and get them to pitch their strengths, because you could make an argument 1A and 1B right there between the O-line and wide receivers. But one of the great things about this especially when you're talking the top three, which are Jalen Smith, he was the top vote getter in the ACC amongst wide receivers in the ACC kickoff media days, and then Des Fitzpatrick, who I think tied the school record for most touchdowns receiving for a freshman school record or school history, and Seth Dawkins, who just quietly racks up some big yards. When you look at those three, they're kind of all interchangeable. They all know how to stretch the field. They all show the ability to go across and not be afraid to stretch out across the middle of the field, and create when they need to. What's exciting about it is he's got, not just those three, but a completely deep stable of wide receivers. He can keep pulling them up, off the bench, guys like Josh Johnson, who's ready to pick up, step up to the next level. So, I mean, if I was Juwan Pass, he is certainly stepping into the right situation when you've got, offensively, your two strengths are clearly your offensive front, and then your wide receivers as deep and talented as they are.
Michael McCammon joining Crimson and Blue Chips, talking Louisville Cardinals, and he is one of the authorities there at Cardinal Authority, a part of the 24/7 Sports Network. That receiver group, do they feel? I know some people saw them in the headlines and thought that was a big deal. I don't. Just the same thing like Bobby Petrino saying we expect to win. What the hell else is he supposed to say? I think we're going to
what's the head coach
lose by 20.
Say?
Yeah, those things are not storylines to me. But what I do look at is, again, and I hate to go back to Lamar so much, but when you have a guy like that, it seems like he gets so much of the benefit of the doubt that on the other side of it, conversely, those guys are looked at as, well, they had Lamar Jackson. So is there a bit of a chip on the shoulder of these guys? Again, they're not young. Jalen Smith's a senior, like you said, top vote getter in the ACC. Do they have – is it a chip on their shoulder as well? Like, hey, we were good with Lamar, but we're still going to be really good without him kind of thing?
I haven't heard anything from that aspect, although that's a good point. But I have not heard them bring anything up, and there's not really been any discussion about that. However, I was talking to Seth Dawkins a couple days ago after practice, and asked him, you guys are looked at as the top wide receivers in the ACC, and some of them, some publications have placed you amongst the top in the nation. What are your thoughts about that? And his reaction was, well, we saw somebody put us at number 11. And we feel kind of disrespected about that. We think we're better than half of the teams that are placed above us. So, they're a very confident group. Obviously, you referenced the Des Fitzpatrick comment about how they're going to win every battle with the secondary or something along those lines. And, and obviously the Bobby Petrino quote, but he's obviously the head coach. But, they are certainly a confident group, but, and they've made some, fantastic catches. There were, I think Lamar would agree with this. There were some times where the wide receivers made him look good as well in the passing game as well. So this is a group that had success for a number of years and expects to do the same this year.
Now looking over at the defense, I think the area where it's not talked about enough when you get to Louisville is some of the defensive playmakers that they've been able to produce. You don't have to look far, right? The NFL draft, Lamar Jackson won in the first round, but he wasn't the first Louisville Cardinal taken. It was Jair Alexander, the cornerback, and he's had a big preseason as well, by the way. So what is the identity of the Louisville defense? Again, conventional thoughts, I would imagine, in the college football world, especially from a fan perspective, is, well, Louisville, Bobby Petrino, Lamar Jackson, they want to score points. So you don't think of defense. But what is that identity? And obviously they've been able to produce some big-time players.
I think this year's defense, because with the exception of last year was kind of an unfortunate hiccup for the football team, especially with Lamar Jackson performing as well as he had. But, the 3 or 4 years prior to that, they were, a top 20, in some cases top 10 defense. Last year, dropping down to, below 70 nationally, which is, you're not going to win too many ball games, playing defense like that. So this year, I think this defense, what's resonated for me and talking to many of the players and the coaches is, one, they've got a brand new first-year defensive coordinator, Brian Van Gorder, and they say they're going to be a lot more aggressive. They're going to attack a lot more. They've bought in a lot more, and I think one thing that's really pushing them is the disappointment that they had last year. They did play better as the season went on. Even though they lost the bowl game, they still played well in the bowl game. That was probably the one game during the year where the offense actually kind of, dropped the ball, so to speak. So I think they're hoping to build on what they did last year. So it's kind of we got this chip on our shoulder. We're coming out to prove that we're a lot better than we showed last year. We're supposed to be a top 20 defense, and daggone it, that's who we're going to be. So I think that's, their kind of, motivation right now is we need to prove something. We're not that, we're not a number 70 team. We're a top 20 team. And, and I think that's what's pushing them right now.
Mike, have you heard any, I know it's early, and I know, Nick Saban doesn't like talking much about the opponent, what have you,
sure.
But from the Louisville side, just maybe even with your sources, maybe even not something verbatim that Petrino or any players have said, or Van Gorder, the defensive coordinator, have you heard any, deliberation between which Bama quarterback to prepare for? Because, at Louisville, it's pretty clear, Jawan Pass, he's the guy. There's talented players behind him, but he's the guy at quarterback. Not so much at Bama, although most people expect it to be Tua Tagovailoa. Have you heard any, deliberations on how to attack this quarterback versus how to attack this other quarterback? And how hard is that? Just in your experience covering Louisville for so many years, how hard is it to prepare for multiple quarterbacks? Because that's something that Louisville has seen a lot in the ACC in that conference.
Yeah, that's, excuse me again, dry throat all of a sudden. But, first, to answer the first portion of that question, that's actually something they have, been trying to keep close to vest as possible. This has been one of the most shut down fall camps they've had. They allowed the media in for about 30 minutes of they had split practices on day one of those two practices, which is basically here you can watch the team stretch. And then they had a fan season preview that lasted an hour, which is, again, watch the team stretch, and then here's the positional drill. So it's kind of neat, but you don't really learn everything. And that's it. They've kept it, shut down. And when you try to pry and ask and try to get some hints out of them, they're pretty quick-witted about it and keep it closed. But truthfully, they're preparing for two quarterbacks, which is obviously the approach you have to take. And and again, I think like you, they're probably leaning towards expecting Tua, but they're probably also expecting to see both quarterbacks play against them. And if I were to guess, that's probably going to be the case. And that's a difficult thing. It doesn't matter which conference you're in, what your opponent is, if you're favored or not, if you're an underdog or not. Preparing for two quarterbacks, especially when they have a differing style, is a challenge. Especially when you're talking first game of the year, and then you're talking, tossing the factor that's the potential national champions and top-ranked Alabama, and that's a tough task. So as Bobby Petrino has said, he believes he can do it, and he's trying to now get that message throughout the team. And, if they can get to that, that process, surpassed, then, hopefully, they can tackle, the potential of at least slowing down two different quarterbacks. But yeah, that's always a difficult challenge when you're facing two different quarterbacks, especially as talented as those as Alabama's.
So the MO of Van Gorder, like you said, at Louisville in year one is going to be aggression. That's at least what he's selling preseason. So that means, once again, that secondary is going to have to be relied upon. Those guys are going to have to hold up man to man. And Alabama's got this young wide receiving core, very, very talented, but very, very young at the same time. What is that group looking like minus Jair Alexander? I know my guy D. Smith is there because he's from Alabama. We covered a lot of these guys, actually, a lot of these guys on the two deep. But beyond D. Smith, who's a senior captain and a safety, of course, how are those corners looking? How do you replace Alexander? And are they proven, I guess, man to man? Are they proven in that type of role?
Yeah, they lost three and a half starters from last year's secondary, including obviously Jair Alexander, as you mentioned. And obviously that's going to throw up red flags as well. However, it's one of those situations where you almost actually might get better when you have a whole secondary like that, kind of a clean slate. They've had some transfers come in. Rajay Burns, a kid out of Louisville Trinity, went to Ohio State out of high school. Some family illness issues. We want to be closer to home. It has transferred in, sat out last year. He was a big-time 4-star defensive back. He's expected to make a big impact. Former Oklahoma Sooner, PJ Ambassador, is a 4-star corner. He's expected to start. It really has developed into one of the leaders of the team. So those two alone have allowed you to have a lot more comfort in developing their younger depth. And so they feel really confident in what they have. A guy by Cornelius Sturchill's the quickest guy on the team, depending on which one you ask. You know how that goes. But he's been waiting for his chance to shine at corner. Rush Yeast he's a true sophomore and really thrown into the fire last year and had some struggles. But whenever you struggle, usually that's a learning moment. And should have a bigger sophomore year as well off the depth chart. But with those transfers, and they also had the number one junior college safety, Marlon Character, has come in. He's looked well from what we're told during fall camp. You mentioned D. Smith, who's taken a great leadership role, was just elected captain, as you mentioned. Kane Pass, Juwan's older brother, has played really well at safety. So they've got a really deep and talented secondary, even though they lost, like I said, 3.5 starters. They could, Bobby Petrino's actually mentioned that this could be the best secondary he's had in any of his teams at Louisville. So they feel pretty confident in what they've got in the secondary.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The transfer market, definitely an aid to Louisville. Transfers mixed in with the returning experience, upperclassmen elsewhere in that group. Very interesting. And again, if they're going to be aggressive, those guys got to hold up, but it seems like they've got the potential to do just that. So that will be interesting one Saturday from now. It's good to say that, right? One Saturday from now. No more countdowns, like 3 Saturdays away. Like, no, it's here, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
And then special teams, real quick. If there's a fan base that appreciates good special teams, it's Alabama's, especially when you get involved in the kicking game. So what's just real quick, Mike, just the state of Louisville special teams, kicker, punter, those units, experience, inexperience. I'm not going to lie to you. I haven't looked up a name on that unit, so please educate me.
Yeah, these are guys that you either don't want to know their name or you do. The kicker, you want to know, the punter, you don't want to know. But Louisville's actually got, everybody back as far as those type of specialists go. Blanton Creaky, the kicker, was Lou Groves, a semifinalist last year. He'll be one of the top kickers in the country this year. Mason King is a punter. He actually punted so few times he didn't even make the ACC or national statistical rankings, but is amongst the top 25 in the country, and is probably going to be even a little bit better this year. But again, the hope is, and this is one of the Louisville things, and this is to dig a fellow SEC member for the Alabama fans. But last year Louisville didn't even punt when they played Kentucky, so they're hoping that's how the season goes, that they never see the punter this year. But yeah, even when they do, they've got a great one in Mason King. They got the long snapper back. He was a number 2 long snapper in the country a couple years ago out of high school. So they've got all the key parts there. They're checking out a number of guys in both the kick and punt return duties. They've got plenty of speed. The team theme this year is Speed City. So that kind of tells you where their strength is, and they've got a handful of guys that are working to return the kicks. But as far as the kickers and the punter, a lot of experience there. Not really concerned for Bobby Petrino.
So Speed City, and I think that leads towards the strengths of the team. I think we can, just based on talking to you and based on what we know, wide receivers, secondary, these are some of the best units at Louisville right now as far as looking ahead to 2018. What are the weaknesses? What are the biggest question marks? Is it in the front seven? Is it quarterback by default? What are the biggest question marks looking at Louisville coming out of fall camp into week 1, ready for Alabama?
I think if you're looking strictly at Louisville, Alabama, I think being game 1, there's a few more questions than if it was Louisville versus, some FCS school or an expected victory, if you will. Obviously, that's going to throw in the Juwan Pass. For example, I think if Juwan Pass was playing in a game where Louisville was favored to win by 30 points, I think he would come out and just light it up. I think we'll see him do that against Indiana State and look like a future All-American for Bobby Petrino. When you're playing in game 1, on a neutral side against the defending national champions, and it's a school that recruited you and you live right across the state line, obviously there could be pressure there for Juwan Pass. So there's a question mark there. Hopefully that offensive line will be able to protect him enough to where he's able to get comfortable. But to me, the biggest question mark is that defensive front of Louisville. They've got to replace a heck of a lot of people. On paper, they've got the guys. A couple of big-time junior college transfers, and Mike Boykin, a guy that's 6'6" and is just kind of a beast, kind of a defensive tackle, nose tackle type of guy. Obviously, they've got Jared Goldwire as well, another one of these just guys that's just really fast, really big, that they're expecting big things from. But the big question mark is, okay, they've looked great in camp. It's your first year on campus. How will you do? And again, this isn't just anybody. This is Alabama. So there's, to me, that's the biggest question is Louisville's defensive front and how they'll react, especially early. And that's the key. If you can play early, then it could be a good game. And if not, it could get ugly really quickly. So it's going to be interesting to see how they come out early.
Very good, and I'm sure you guys will have it covered wall to wall. You already have. I've already looked over there. I looked over there this weekend. You guys have it covered, position by position, wall to wall. CardinalAuthority.com. Bama fans listening, refresh that page every day. There's going to be more information. Bobby Petrino, everybody else talking Alabama finally, instead of just pretending like they're not worried about Bama, just like Bama has pretended like they're not worried about Louisville. But we could finally get that again. CardinalAuthority.com, your top source for Louisville news. Sir, it was a pleasure. We really appreciate that. And if you're going to Orlando, safe travels. But either way, thanks for educating us on one of the best teams in the ACC.
Hey, I appreciate it, John. You do great stuff. Anytime you need anything, just give a holler. And we will see you on 247 Sports Network. Keep up the great work, and appreciate it. And, everybody have a great, safe travel, and good luck, and have a great time in Orlando.
A major thank you to Michael McCammon for joining the podcast to kick off the week. Tons of great info there, and you really get a good snapshot of what Louisville wants to do, wants to look like following the Lamar Jackson era. A couple of quick notes there. As we mentioned there at the end, I think Louisville defensively going to rely on that talented and experienced secondary, helped by those 2 transfers, one from Ohio State, one from Oklahoma. So maybe there's some vulnerabilities there in that front 7. So perhaps the Alabama running game has a chance to do some things here in this game. And remember, if Brian Van Gorder's going to be very aggressive on defense, those guys could be left on an island. So if and when Alabama does have to throw, perhaps there will be a lot of man coverage or cover one underneath that. So there's opportunities for Alabama's wide receivers to win one-on-one battles at some point in this game. And again, we talk about this with Alabama. it's pick your poison. There's no one receiver you're going to double. There's no one guy you have to stop. There is no Calvin Ridley. There is no Amari Cooper. There is no Julio Jones. But there's 3 guys right now who we know can beat you. So how do you defend that? And I think that's where the advantages really start to pour more in Alabama's direction. Again, more on that later in the week as we get closer to kickoff. And then offensively for Louisville, it's going to be more of a classic Bobby Petrino approach. And I think that's been very successful over the years. But again, just like we talk about, if Tua's the guy at Alabama, it'll be his first career start. Same deal for Jawan Pass. So how does he handle the bright lights against an Alabama? Obviously, though, those are unknowns despite his experience, despite his familiarity with this system. So thank you to Michael McCammon for really spelling it out. I think both secondaries will be tested in this game. Which one holds up better may be the key to which one can kind of run away with this thing. So good early foundation on Louisville. Again, we're going to continue to dig into the Cardinals throughout the week leading up to Saturday. So there is your team fix. I'm sure some of you clicked this podcast to get into some recruiting, so we're not going to leave you alone on that front. And the way we typically bridge the gap is through you, our listeners, Q&A style, and we will begin on Twitter. Rafael Monroy joining the conversation via the hashtag CABC. He said, Goodwin, the sophomore running back, looks like a very good back. Rafael is referencing Armani Goodwin. Remember, like we talked about Friday, a bevy of Alabama commitments on television, on ESPN, on ESPN2, on ESPNU over the weekend. Hewitt Trustful, Hoover, Grayson, DeMatha, all had Alabama commitments participating on national television, and pretty for the most part, I should say, each of them held their own. Paul Tyson threw for 400 yards. Jalen Warsham had over 100 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. Rashad Cheney made some plays in the backfield against Hewitt Trustful. Malachi Moore held his own for the most part against Jaden Hazelwood, a 5-star wide receiver, and really looked good in press coverage, which is still where he's most comfortable at this point. But there were some guys who Bama hasn't yet targeted, hasn't yet gone in on, that certainly made an impression as well. And Armani Goodwin was named the top prospect on offense in the state on 24/7 Sports earlier in the week, and he made his Hewitt Trustful debut on that national stage on Saturday. Had about 150 yards rushing, just extremely low to the ground, runs with a great forward lean, thick lower body, explosive cat, both in his acceleration and top speed. We talked recently about getting to top speed and how quickly you get there, and that's a big asset in Trey Sanders' game, talking about running backs. But the top speed of Goodwin is there as well. A shorter guy, 5'8", 5'9" right now, but just a sophomore. So we'll see how he progresses in his career. A guy that I think Alabama could eventually be in on. And heck, we should just predict that for every good Hewitt Trustful player, because Alabama has 4 of them verbally committed right now. So, hey, why not a couple of more? So Armani Goodwin definitely, I think, made a name for himself. For those who didn't know, we had been kind of singing his praises on 24/7 Sports for quite some time. But now everybody got a look at a guy that the Hewitt Trustful crew is extremely excited about. I mean, these coaches rave about his ability, sub 4.4 in the 40 according to them. So he's going to have a lot of eyes on him, maybe some pressure as well moving forward. Hewitt Trustful, by the way, loses that game to Cedar Grove. A bit of an upset there, in my opinion. Josh R at @insider_Alabama via Twitter tweets the show at CABC Pod. How about a breakdown of Ty Robinson? Ty Robinson's a West Coaster, defensive lineman, 4-star on the 24/7 Sports composite at 6'6", 285 in the class of 2019. We talk about a lot of defensive linemen in this group. Don't typically get over there to the West Coast talking about these D linemen aside from Fa'atui Tuitele. But Ty Robinson's a guy who can do some things. Again, we mentioned the size. Alabama is listed as an offer on his profile for 24/7 Sports. We're not sure exactly how much Alabama is pressing, especially with a heavy D-line class already on board. But the guy can do some things. Again, the size is unmistakable, but he's got some good explosion off of the football, built kind of in that Justin Eboigbe role in terms of height and weight, playing a classic defensive end in high school. But a bigger guy who I think eventually can move inside, but he's pretty polished on the outside. I like his aggression. He's got a little bit of an edge to his game, really, really quick off of the ball, especially given his size. He can play with his hands, extend a little bit. So there's a lot to like about Ty Robinson. Heck, he's a blue chip recruit for a reason. We're just not sure how far along Alabama is with him on the board because, again, the D-line board is pretty full. A lot of verbal commitments. Rashad Cheney, DJ Dale, Justin Eboigbe, Kevin Harris, King Makuta. The list goes on and on. So typically we think more of an interior focus for Alabama going forward on the line. But this guy, Ty Robinson, can maybe grow into an interior guy. He has experience inside a little bit as well. Very, very quick off the ball. Love his hands and aggression. The guy can get through multiple blocks and make some plays. So he could be a guy to kind of keep on the back burner. We appreciate Josh for asking because we weren't extremely familiar with Ty either, but he's certainly one who maybe bears watching going into the future. Rafael Monroy, a frequent contributor of the show, appreciating our last podcast. We appreciate that. We had a good time with Kevin Harris on Friday. And Rafael Monroy getting the Bama vibes going now that it is game week and now that the fall is here. He didn't really ask us a question here. They were asking more of, hey, we just sent this out to the family. So they wanted to share. And we'll read it. I think you diehards have probably seen this on the timeline already, but in case you hadn't, it's kind of an unofficial Bama in the fall rulebook, guidelines to abide by. There's 5 simple rules for being an Alabama fan. Number 1, I will not attend anything past noon on Saturdays unless you have NCAA football on the television. Events with Alabama football take priority over all other events. Events with SEC football will take priority over all events except Alabama football. 2, I will be high-strung, loud, and obnoxious if you are around me while Alabama is playing. 3, I will wear Alabama apparel on Saturday. No exceptions there. 4, weddings are for bye weeks. It's not my fault you are starting your married life proving to everyone you are a horrible planner. I won't be there, but I will wish you the best of luck as soon as the game's over. And number 5, in the event that we are watching a game together and you're not an Alabama fan, you will not cheer against Alabama and I will not cheer against your team. The rule can be confusing to some, but it is explained by saying that you can make positive statements about your team while not making negative comments against Alabama. Thanks for your understanding, everyone. Roll Tide, roll. That's the unofficial, hey, it's fall, leave me alone unless you got the game on deal. Appreciate Rafael Monroy for sharing that with us. I know there's another question coming in from Rafael. We had a big discussion. A lot of the CABC family had a big discussion Sunday night. ESPN was re-airing all of the games Alabama played from Atlanta to open the season against Florida State to Atlanta in the national championship victory over Georgia. So we had a lot of discussion on the podcast on Sunday night via Twitter. But we did still get a couple of other questions. Luke Ferguson jumping in. Let's talk quarterbacks. Just kidding. I'm over that. Thank you, Luke. You're not alone there, but we'll see how everyone else deals with it moving forward. Luke says, any official visits coming up that we need to know about? This is a good question. With the accelerated calendar, with everything sped up in recruiting, you expect earlier official visits in the fall. But it kind of doesn't shake out too well for Alabama because, as always, you're kicking off neutral site, so you cannot host a kid officially. Now, you can host them unofficially, and Bama is going to have kids represented at this game from a recruiting perspective, but there cannot be communication between the kid and the coach. So it's purely from a spectator's perspective where the kids can be left tickets by Alabama. We know the 2020 quarterback commitment Carson Beck out of Jacksonville will be there. Ryan Davis, the top 100 linebacker, currently committed to the University of Georgia, is expected to be there. We expect other kids from the state of Florida to make their way to Orlando for this game, but those are unofficial visits. Official visitors, I think Bama's going to have to wait. It looks like Texas A&M, September 22nd, that weekend is probably going to be the target for Alabama in hosting official visitors for the first time this fall. Bama's got to hit the road, and then it's got a subpar game against Arkansas State. No disrespect to the Red Wolves, but in terms of an official visit, presentation, SEC, it looks like that will be the game Bama tries to build up towards in recruiting. There is one scheduled, according to Bama Online and 24/7 Sports. Wan'Dale Robinson, the 4-star all-purpose back slot receiver, gadget guy who has eluded me in the evaluation process to this point, but his name just keeps popping up. He had a ridiculous start to his season over the weekend. I don't have the numbers, but it was something like 200 rushing yards, 100 receiving yards, 100 kick return yards, 4 or 5 touchdowns. I mean, the guy is electric. He's reminding some folks of Jalen Waddle, of Slade Bolden, guys that Bama just brought in. So is Bama willing to take another smaller, shiftier guy at wide receiver, having just taken Jalen Waddle and Slade Bolden? And remember, you've got Keelan Robinson on the verbal commitment list right now, who's a smaller, shiftier guy. So we'll see how much Bama's willing to play with that with Wan'Dale Robinson. But we know he's pretty darn high on the wide receiver board, so he's one certainly to watch going forward. He is, I believe, scheduled for that Texas A&M weekend. I don't think he will be the only guy who takes an official visit during that weekend. I think more will build up to that point. I think you can get a couple of commitments in town that weekend as well in terms of official visits. And obviously every home game for Alabama will be big unofficially with kids trying to get to games. And Texas A&M, certainly Jimbo Fisher's return to Tuscaloosa will not be any different. But no early officials just yet for that Arkansas State weekend. I don't really expect it to materialize too much, even if a couple of kids do say, hey, I'll visit that weekend. But Texas A&M is the date I would circle first, September 22nd, before some legitimate action on the recruiting scene with official visitors. So certainly something to watch. Never too early, Luke, to jump in on that, and we appreciate you asking that question. We have a question via Instagram jumping in here. Dylan Britt, who usually goes the email route, Dylan now going the Instagram route. We appreciate that, Dylan. He says, hey, John, figured I would actually send my question on Insta today instead of the old email. In your opinion, do you think the Ohio State saga will help Bama in recruiting? I saw they lost a linebacker commitment. Could we have a chance with him? Thanks. Yeah, Kane Patterson out of Tennessee, 4-star linebacker, probably more of an inside linebacker, which is a need for Alabama, was the first casualty of this recruiting class following the Urban Meyer suspension, the Zach Smith dismissal, and then whatever you want to call the administration's handling of it / Urban Meyer's handling of it after that. Kane Patterson did decommit. I was actually surprised there wasn't more attrition in the class. Harry Miller's mother defended Urban Meyer, the 5-star center from Buford, Georgia. So it's becoming a bit of a polarizing topic with recruits. Former players and their parents are starting to kind of go the other way on Urban Meyer, and I think that's where there could be an impact, Dylan. I think the perception of Urban Meyer is certainly hurt by this incident. Remember, really at Florida, at the end of that tenure, whether it was the arrests that from his team, whether it was how he departed and left that job for health reasons and maybe other things, that is when perception began to get a little negative with Urban Meyer. Then he's immediately on television analyzing, and then he's immediately the head coach at Ohio State thereafter. And since then, there's been some questions pop up with him, but none bigger than this one about him lying, about him lacking some integrity, and even following this whole deal, he didn't recognize the victim by name. He never said Courtney Smith's name after his punishment was handed down, and he came off fairly insensitive. And even when he was asked about it, I believe his response was, I'm just sorry everybody's in this situation, which was, pretty shallow of him. So I think a lot of people looked at that and said, okay, the character of Urban Meyer is at a minimum under question. I'm not saying we know he's this or that, but at a minimum, it is questionable at this point. So if you're a kid, you might not look heavily into that because, again, these are teenagers. Winning and losing is a big deal. The NFL is a big deal, and Urban Meyer still checks those boxes. But when you get into the players' camp, those around him, mom, dad, big brother, high school coaches, mentors, trainers, handlers in some cases, these are the people who you would expect to be, a little more forward with the reservations surrounding Urban Meyer. I don't know if that contributed to Kane Patterson's decommitment, but obviously he backed off regardless of why. And the timing suggests that it had something to do with this Urban Meyer situation. So I think more of that will come to pass in the coming weeks and months. There are some people who think that the Urban Meyer situation is still ongoing, that it's not over at Ohio State. We know Brett McMurphy feels that way, but I think others are beginning to feel that way to some degree as well. So it's something that I think you'll see an impact right now, and you've already seen a tangible one in this decommitment. But I think going forward, how many commitments do they add after this point? That is where you could see an impact as well. And Ohio State, as usual, is in on a who's who list of 5-star prospects across the country and certainly in the Midwest. Number one prospect in Ohio, Zach Harrison. Everybody thinks he's going to Ohio State. He lives close by. Does this give Penn State an advantage? Does this give Michigan an advantage to maybe snag that kid? I think other schools in the Big Ten will certainly benefit. In terms of Alabama, where it could benefit, I don't think there's a pure head-to-head right now that Alabama's really fighting for against Ohio State. I think, Georgia, LSU, Auburn, those are the schools that Alabama's dealing with more. LSU, against Sopsher, Devontae Lee, guys like that. Georgia for, Clay Webb, George Pickens, Nakobe Dean, several other guys. And then Auburn, of course, with George Pickens and Clay Webb and several others. Those are the main competitors for Alabama. So there's really not a head-to-head with Ohio State, which is kind of odd because there has been many of them in the past. Don't really see it in this cycle, but this is the deal. When you're talking about established head coaches and perception, we all know that conversation begins with Nick Saban. It's typically Urban Meyer thereafter. And I think that going forward is something that could be put into question by coaches, by players to some degree, and that is where you could see some separation begin between Alabama and Ohio State. Remember, head-to-head, Ohio State's got the advantage, right? They won in the college football playoff in 2014 before winning it all against Oregon that year. So head-to-head, Urban Meyer's got a lot of clout against Nick Saban, a lot of clout against Alabama. But now the perception of the difference between the two, I think, could be widening because of some of these off-the-field things. In addition to, hey, Nick Saban's won 1 million national championships compared to, 3 for Urban Meyer. So that is all going to factor in as well, the facts. But the perception, I think, helps to widen that gap with impressionable young people as well as their parents. Mom wants the kid to be in a safe situation. Mom wants to say, hey, take care of my baby. That's the conventional recruiting thought from the parents. So you just wonder how that down the road could impact Ohio State. Again, I don't think we'll see a ton of it in 2019. on their commitment list, there are not a lot of guys who Bama beat down the door for. I think, maybe Jordan Battle, the safety, is a guy to keep an eye on if he opens things up. Maybe he's a guy Bama pushes a little bit more for, but remember, Dax Hill still uncommitted. Noah Pola-Gates still uncommitted, guys that we know are very, very high on the board. And Ohio State is not in the running for either of those two. So there's really not a lot of head-to-head, but going forward, we know there will be, because every other year it seems like Bama and Ohio State are really battling for a couple of prospects. So, and again, the perception of Bama being on top may be most important here, and that gap widening perceptually with Nick Saban over Urban Meyer. Maybe Kirby Smart and Dabo Swinney slide up and gain a spot or two because of this. So they could even, have more of a benefit than Alabama. But perceptionally, it's not a good look for Ohio State, and they're in the running for 5 stars every year, so that will hurt to some degree. Very good question from Dylan Britt, and really one that we don't have the answer to just yet. That's something we'll have to look back on later on, but certainly it doesn't help Ohio State, and you wonder how their recruiting class this year and certainly moving forward could be impacted. Final question we'll dig into today, a bit of a comparison, a bit of a who would you take from YouTube, believe it or not, and certainly if you're listening, please subscribe on YouTube, follow us there. You're going to get all the podcasts we ever produce and more content. You're going to get additional supplemental items that you're not going to get on SoundCloud, that you're not going to get on 24/7 Sports. Follow our team at YouTube, who will certainly be taking the torch, taking the baton from me as they explore their own content items. So if you're a Bama fan, Crimson and Blue Chips on YouTube, definitely a spot you want to hit. And this question comes via YouTube from Panther Pro 22. It says, listener question, who would you take between Trey Sanders, Zachary Evans, and Kendall Milton? I'm not sure you have really looked into Evans or Milton enough yet since they are 2020 prospects, but Alabama seems to have a pretty good chance with all 3 running backs. I've caught a lot of flack for my Trey Sanders eval and opinion. Again, I know Panther Pro's not saying it, but I've caught a lot of flack because I don't think he's necessarily a 5-star running back. I think he's a very, very good running back, very accomplished, has a lot of the skills you want. Again, scouting him live 2 Fridays ago, extremely impressed with his acceleration and physicality moving north and south compared to what I had seen in years prior. But again, 5 stars are special. They're different. They feel different. Evan Neal, Nolan Smith, Patrick Surtain, Najee Harris, Derrick Henry. Those were 5 stars. I'm just not ready to put Trey there yet. He can get there by the end of the season as we see him more, and he is more settled at that running back position. But for me, just not there quite yet. But let's take a look at some of these other prospects. Both of these guys are 5 stars in the class of 2020, and our friends at Max Preps will help us out here on the simulcast, looking at Zachary Evans out of North Shore, a guy who's a little bit smaller than a Trey Sanders, but you already see something different compared to Trey. There's a shiftiness. There's a long speed element with Zachary Evans, and that's one of the biggest concerns with Trey is how can he elude in the open field? We know he can stick his foot in the ground and make one guy miss and get vertical, but then how do you balance off of that? Can you redirect and redirect again thereafter? Zachary Evans has some of that, as you can see on the simulcast, and he's a little hurdle happy as well, but he's got acceleration, top speed, very elusive in the open field, very tough to slow down, and he plays against great competition at North Shore High School in Houston. But what I like about him is the forward lean and the shiftiness, the suddenness in his game. It feels different. It feels different. A little bit of Alvin Kamara in his game, in my opinion, and certainly enough long speed. And again, playing against that type of competition makes it that much more impressive. Zachary Evans, 5'11", 203, number 6 player in America on 24/7 Sports. And as our poster, Panther Pro, mentioned, Alabama certainly in the mix for him. Same can be said for Kendall Milton, another 5-star on 24/7 Sports, or excuse me, on the composite. Number 10 player in the country on 24/7 Sports. Number 2 back behind Zach Evans. And once again, California kid. Bama's in it. Tosh Lupoi, a part of that recruitment. And then, you watch the video here. He's a little bit bigger, 6'2", 210. So he's a little more filled out at this point compared to Zachary Evans. A little bigger, a little more physical. So maybe compared to Trey Sanders, looks more of the part in terms of a comparison. Trey probably 215 and Milton right around 210. But again, when you see him carry the football, you immediately see shiftiness, you see redirection, you see vision, and you see that acceleration and burst that has been so impressive with Trey Sanders here lately. But you see more going against the grain, more reversing of field, more ability in the open field, along with that acceleration. Top end speed, good here as well. So I think that's where these guys are just a little bit different. The footwork, the ability to make a cut and then make a cut off of that one, almost setting up a defender like a wide receiver. That's just something we see these kids do a little bit more than Trey today. Again, it's a projection business. So can Trey evolve into that? Sure, he can. But remember, you're talking about a guy who was a two-way player, a safety, up until the last 18 months or so, where he's fully committed to the running back position. So if you're projecting him down the road and you're giving him 5 stars, you're saying he will show more ability like that in the open field. At a quick glance, my first true impression of these guys between Kendall Milton, Zach Evans, and Trey Sanders, if I had to pick one, I believe that was the question from our guy, Panther Pro, who would I take between the three? Really tough question. I kind of lean Zach Evans. I think he's got an element in the open field unlike the other two, but Milton's not far off. He is not far off. Great instincts, and that burst might be the best of the three. Top end speed, I think Zach Evans takes it there. But Trey's not far behind these guys. So I think what's scary about Milton and Evans is that they're underclassmen, or they're juniors, not seniors. That's where it gets pretty scary. So I'd probably lean Zach Evans barely. Again, these guys are all 24/7 Sports composite 5-star recruits, so we're really splitting hairs here. I think I would lead Zach Evans slightly over Milton and Sanders, who I think are fairly similar at this stage. But again, Milton, you like his ability in the open field a little bit more than Trey right now. I think Trey runs behind his pads with more power and low center of gravity than Milton right now. So that's an area that I think he needs to improve upon a little bit as well. But three pretty dynamic backs. I think Alabama would be thrilled to have any one of these guys, two if they're lucky. It's a special time for running backs. We thought the position was dying. We thought that the 5-star running back would be deceased at this point, but not the case. Not the case. There's been a renaissance of running backs in the NFL and college football, and it's trickling down to high school as well. And I think Alabama will continue to try to take advantage of that position. So thank you to Panther Pro for the question. Again, you can hit us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter at CABC Pod, email cabcpod@gmail.com. A million ways to be involved with us. You can even post a comment on SoundCloud if you prefer that. And we will try to get that discussion going with what you would like to discuss. So that will do it for this Monday edition of Crimson and Blue Chips. Thank you very much for listening. Kicking off game week with some in-depth Louisville talk with Michael McCammon and a bevy of Q&A with you, our listener. We'll see you in 48 hours for a Wednesday edition of CABC. God bless. Garcia out.